Firstly, I think this is first time come to Alambama. And actually, first engagement, serious engagement, is a meeting with scientists in the university. I feel great honor. I think I reached yesterday. So first engagement is sleep. That's good for health, good for physical. Now serious engagement, second engagement is discussing about mind and brain, these things. It's actually for mind now. So indeed, it is really the knowledgeable and experienced great scientist. I really feel great honor. And I think the background, my own
interest.
Story. Since my childhood, I, as a type of person or boy who always curiosity. Whenever I come across something new, I always arise question, why, how, always. So I think that maybe because of the plasticity.
Brain plasticity.
I feel because of my mother, very, very kind mother, very, very affectionate, compassionate. So therefore, I think my brain, no fear, no kind of anxiety. So that I think some help, the proper development, my brain. So I think one of the nature of brain, a human brain, not animal. The human brain is the ability to inquire, right?
To absorb and inquire.
Inquire. So I think because of kindness, I think really helped. I think a proper development of my brain. I'm quite sure if I grown up in the atmosphere of fear, anxiety, I think the nature, proper development of brain, I think some difficulties. I feel that. And then, because name of Dalai Lama, so at a very young age, start study. Monastic the education system. I think one good thing, our system, very much emphasis, use logical approach.
Reasoning.
Reasoning. Actually, one using Buddha's advice, he stated, "Oh, my follower, monk, scholars, should not accept my teaching out of faith, out of devotion, but rather thorough investigation and experiment." So the education which I went through, that kind of the principle, investigate. So use logical approach. That also I think helpful to grow our brain more because of the top of
more critically,
with
greater critical inquiry.
So then eventually, you see, the interest about science. I think really introduced about technology is some small toy, like railway.
Trains.
You see, what is it?
Toy trains.
So, and also car. So, when they are moving, and immediately you see how the mechanics of the system. So, short moment I play, and then I settle, open, dismantle. Often you see, fail to
put them back.
But that's, you see, the beginning, the technology, these missions. And then one old movie projector, there's some small dynamo, produce electricity, then develop interest about electricity by that. So at that time, sometimes I think I more interested about this mechanic thing rather than a real study. So as far as read text or memorize, our tradition is memorizing these root text, we call root text. So in that aspect, I'm quite a lazy student. And these mechanic things, these are, as soon as I wake up, I always remember these things. So then, after 59, I have the opportunity, is in meeting with more scientists. So, then over 30 years, you see, meeting with scientists, mainly 4 fields: cosmology, Buddhist cosmology also there, but modern cosmology is precise, much advanced. These are not based on scriptures, but through observation. So wonderful, really convincing. So as a result of meeting or learning modern cosmology, some Buddhist texts of cosmology now no longer I believe. So I took the liberty. I follow sincerely the Buddha's advice, not out of faith or devotion, but investigate. So through investigation, some of the Buddhist sort of explanation or concept of cosmology is difficult to accept. Then second, neurobiology. Plasticity.
For example, neuroscience, including neuroplasticity.
Oh, really? Really remarkable. Really remarkable. And then physics, particularly quantum physics. It's very similar. There's some of the Buddhist idea, Buddhist school of thought. Their idea, very similar. We cannot find things objectively exist from objectively. Then psychology. Neuroscientist. So psychology is concerned. We study part of our study. So Buddhist psychology, as the ancient Indian psychology, really highly developed. So sometimes I maybe a little bit prejudiced Sometimes I compare ancient Indian psychology, including Buddhist psychology. The modern Western psychology is like kindergarten level.
For example, one of the fundamental distinctions that is drawn in ancient Indian psychology is between conceptual thoughts on the one hand and sensory modalities and sensory perceptions on the other. That distinction between conceptual versus non-conceptual processes doesn't seem to be even discussed in Western psychology.
So since I think many years, I suggested some of our conference, it is quite easy to check the brain movement when we focusing through sensorial consciousness or seeing, hearing. Then close eye, just thinking, not relying on
sensory experience.
Sensory sort of experience, just thinking. At that level, you see, thinking, what's
So for example, like analysis and critical inquiry is really not at the sensory level, it's at the mental level.
So it seems, I think, easy to make a distinction. The person who now these wires put there, and then we can, I think, judging the movement of the brain, I think we can say, oh, now that person mainly, you see, experiencing
thoughts,
mental level. Now this person, you see, because of relying on sensorial level. I think very easy. So like that. So these four fields, we have common ground or common thing. So discuss, dialogue. Now over 30 years experience, it's really mutual benefit. Immense sort of valuable information from Western science to us and to the scientist about psychology, about mind, these things. Many scientists really showing genuine interest and eagerness to learn from
Eastern tradition.
Eastern tradition. So I think basically, I often used to tell him, the meeting matter and mind, that's the place East-West meeting.
Come
together. So that's about
my
background. So in the early period, the Chilean
Varela, Francisco, the Chilean scientist Francisco Varela.
He showing interest about Buddhism. So sometimes in our meeting, he often say, now I'm speaking with Buddhist cap. And another occasion he say, now I'm speaking with scientists cap. So now this moment, I also say scientist cap. Thank you.
Dr. Mirzanek?
It's a great pleasure to be here with you, Your Holiness, and I'm obviously a great admirer of your endless efforts to better the position of humankind. And this is a goal in our own weak way that we share with you. I want to say at the beginning that the science that I'm going to talk about has been contributed to by many people, by many scientists, many healers, many technologists. And I'm just one of them. So I'm just a worker in the field. And some of the best of these scientists have worked from this great university. And this is unappreciated widely in the world. Some of the most important contributions to neuroplasticity research has been done here at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. I want to talk about brain plasticity in general, and I want to try to tell you about some of the new and exciting things that have changed how we think about it as it relates to helping people. Because ultimately, from our perspective, it's really about delivering help to people who struggle. Now, you know that brain plasticity is the basis of the brain's creation of a model of the world, that the brain changes in an astounding way, that literally trillions of moments of change underlie the creation of each of us in a way that magnificently individualizes us, so that by these changes, no one is like any other who ever was or ever will be. Each one of us a marvelous creation of these processes that we're endowed with. Each one of us from such different histories, each one a different path inside and in our interactions with the world. Every brain is massively specialized by brain plasticity processes. So when we acquire an ability, for example, any ability, like the ability to read, we acquire a reading brain because the brain changes itself physically. It changes itself functionally. A child that hasn't acquired this ability doesn't have a reading brain. They lack these changes. They suffer because these changes cannot be driven, cannot be created within their brain.
So he's already been asking questions of the two brain images. The contrast is not during the reading and non-reading, but you're talking about individuals who have the capacity to
We're
read.
looking about individuals that are reading, have mastered reading, and individuals that have struggled and cannot master reading or have not learned to read. Right. So when we look in their brain, we see areas that are activated, areas that are excited, areas that are engaged that contribute to the reading. And there are 6 or 7 such areas in the brain of a reader.
This is on the back.
Right, right. And the area that's indicated by the green circle at the back in the reading brain actually accounts for the translation between the sound parts of words and their representation by letter. That's the critical step in reading. The area that's more anterior toward the front of the brain is actually, its activity is actually highly correlated with the interpretation of the meaning of words as they're being read. Now, it turns out that it's quite easy to train the brain of most children who can't read to convert them to a brain, to give them a brain that is a reading brain. So in the case of the children at the bottom that are represented by the non-reader, we train 20 of them in a certain way for about 20 hours in each child. And 17 of these children acquire the ability to read and read at or above grade level within a year. And when we look in their brain, they have a reading brain, of course. And the brain has changed physically and functionally and chemically in ways that empowers that acquisition, that recovery of ability. We've trained several million children that have such struggles to recover this ability to read. You can see in the brain on the left that there's a strong activity below the circle that's towards the back of the brain. That always occurs in a child that's just acquiring this ability to make the translation between word sounds and between writing. And I might say that if we looked in the brain several months later, it would look just like the brain of any other reader. Now, the reason that it still has this primitive appearance is because we did not train the children to recover this ability by training them to read. We trained them in a way that clarified the representation of word sounds. Because their problem in translation, the most common problem in translation, is a problem in the brain resolving, representing the details in what the child hears. And therefore the translation to writing makes little sense. And that's another way of saying when you think about a problem in the brain that contributes to the struggle of a child or adult, there's always a deeper neurology. There's always a more complicated set of considerations inside that must be considered. that must be addressed, that must be corrected. Now, our brains have massively specialized by all of the skills and abilities that define us as an operational person. Now, from another perspective, plasticity has done another wonderful thing for us that most of us do not fully appreciate. As we've constructed our model of the world by the brain changing itself, it's building that change on the basis of what belongs with how the present moment predicts the next moment. It's about the association of things in time that is the glue that holds our thoughts together and creates the flow of our thoughts. And every time we have
that plasticity that she
and every time we have a feeling, every time we have a thought, every time we act, the brain makes a special association. And the association is to us. It creates our self-identification. It grows us in power as the actor, as the captain of our ship. Now, one of the wonderful things about this process is that it naturally incorporates anything else, anyone else that's important to us, into us. It's actually built for attachment. It's built to attach the mother to the infant and the infant to the mother, because the mother has such a strong and heavy level of interaction, of love, of affection with the child, that the child becomes part of the mother, part of what the mother is, just like the mother becomes part of the child. We are naturally constructed for attachment, and only when things go terribly wrong do we live a detached life. We are made to be social, interactive creatures. We are constructed for attachment. Now, a key aspect of brain plasticity, and that we more deeply appreciate in recent time, is the fact that the processes that control these changes are by their nature reversible. And that's another, we have appreciated that for a long time. So when the scientists first speculated about plasticity, and one of the great original thinkers was a Canadian scientist, Donald Hebb, he speculated that a great principle that could explain much of the origin of behavior would be brain changing itself so that things that occurred together in time would strengthen together in connection. And we quickly discovered about 20 years ago that this great principle applies as the brain is changing itself. And what that means is that you can change the conditions of learning and change the outcome. And you can actually drive the brain to strengthen its abilities or to degrade them. So, for example, you can turn a hand by training into a more and more powerful instrument, more and more useful to an individual. Or you can train it in another way and degrade its use and turn it into a useless claw. Plasticity is a two-way process. It can control improvement. It can control degradation or negative change. We study this. We study this in important experiments, and we looked at the brain of a young animal or old animal, or we look at the brain of a young human or an old human. We looked at about 20 different physical and functional.
This was asking question, this both improvement and degradation, right, which is the principal expressions of plasticity.
Right.
The point is that's the very nature of brain itself, but it's not really, you're not giving any gene-based explanation.
But particularly the plasticity.
So are you talking about a specific type of plasticity mechanism? Or
I'm talking about, I'm going to say that all of the processes of change are driven in a forward direction or negative. And I'm going to explain why this is so. This is a new understanding. And then So, Your Holiness, we look at the characteristics of a brain in the prime of life, when the individual is most vigorous, and we've looked in animal brains and we've looked in human brains, when the brain is most vigorous. And then we've looked at the brain near the end of life. We've looked at it physically, we've looked at it functionally, we looked at it chemically. We've looked at processes that are explained by hundreds of known cellular and molecular processes in biology. And the first thing we ask is, which of these major differences in the physicality of the brain, or in the function of the brain, or in the chemistry of the brain differ in very old versus the brain in the prime of life? And the answer is, everything is different. Everything is different. And then we ask, of these things that are different, which of them advantage the operations of the older brain? Now, the older brain has accumulated knowledge and has wisdom. But when you look at the brain as an operational machine, how fast is it? How accurate is it? How reliable is it? Older is always poorer. Older always suffers. And I'm talking now about great generalities, because many older brains are not poor, do not suffer, as I'll talk about in a minute. But in general, older is poorer. Older is slower, less precise. Older is less accurate. And now to the real experiment. And the real experiment is how many of these things that define the older brain as being poorer, less accurate, less precise, less reliable, can be altered by engaging the brain in a positive way to drive the changes in a positive direction. And the answer is, everything is changeable in a positive way. Every characteristic that defines the brain that's struggling in old age can be improved by engaging the brain to train. So we sent older individuals, you could say, to the rehabilitation clinic. We trained them, and with relatively simple forms of training, some of them associated with how you would think about training, we saw vast improvement. And most of these things can be driven far back in a youthful direction, so that the brain can operate with more powers again, and the individual can have a stronger, healthier life. So here are some of the things that we changed, and this is a long, complicated list. But I deliberately left the long, complicated list because I wanted you to understand the magnificence of the reversibility of these processes. The brain recovers its powers of discrimination. It operates again at speed. It recovers its high-precision analytic machinery. It changes its chemistry to be more like a young brain. It revitalizes key brain cell populations. It recovers its ability to suppress distractions, something that you know about. It quiets down. It recovers its ability to operate in a noisy environment. It recovers its powers of prediction, and so on and so on. Everything we look at recovers. And in most of these characteristics, the recovery is far back in the direction of the performance of a youthful brain. Now, actually, every neurological ability that we look at is improvable at any age. So here I've just looked at 8 abilities that we've studied. One of these represents the performance in a task that was developed by scientists here at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, which is exciting. But what you see in each one of these panels are individuals between the ages of 20 and 100. And what you can see is that everybody, at every age, the movement from the red dots to the blue dots is improving about equally. And if you look at the purple lines, you see that if you take a 60-year-old brain person back to a 20-year-old person, you can see that the 60-year-old, after training, has the performance of almost any 20-year-old before training. So I could show you 50 charts like this with thousands of people that have been trained, and they all show the same thing. Every aspect of the brain is plastic, and when it struggles, it can be driven in an improving direction to a more useful performance ability.
So His Holiness is interested in what exactly is the intervention or the training that you're bringing in.
Right.
Does it involve
Right.
like kind of vitamins, some kind of,
and physical exercise.
or physical exercise?
No, it involves
does it involve
training
more
a
cognitive?
person in a highly controlled and progressive way, interacting with stimuli that are delivered by listening or from vision on a computer. It is delivered by technology. And it is done, and we do that not because it is the most natural or desirable, but because we can accomplish change with such high efficiency. So that in 5 hours or 10 hours, in an individual that struggles, we can drive very meaningful and large-scale change. We see this as
computer tone ta visual part ne ta ne samlo dostan se me patus che servita kata chu computer tone te chi serela
we
stimulation che
Well, that's the end. Computer
so it's in a sense can be so His Holiness's point is that even if you're using technology like computer, it's in a sense kind of a guided mental processes that you're leading the person through.
And we see this is absolutely, we're trying to engage the brain in higher levels of operation. We always have the mind involved in controlling the operations and decisions, always, because we know that this is a requirement for driving change. So you can't think of
where is mind?
The mind is always, there is always the target. You must know where you're going to go anywhere.
Kansa chitaba Qurangi sim ke me pate ke chimshu chagores kasi chini ama langa da maso na coaching ni sim chade orwas computer thone labji jabsha ma to kansa chitaba lo Quran che
only with the goal can you find
not here.
So
the Hindu
so His Holiness was saying that incidentally in some Hindu traditions, when they meditate on Atma, the pure self, they tend to focus more here.
Oh, okay.
So you're pointing to that area.
we try to use it all.
Oh yes, that's okay. That's okay.
So how do you turn a brain that is struggling into and increase its powers? You have one answer. We think that what we do is helpful and synergistic with the wonderful tradition that that follows the way that you train. We think we can complement and strengthen and enrich what happens in the brain for someone that's struggling. So when we think about how we can turn an older impaired brain into what appears to be a stronger one, we train it. We train it intensely, and we can drive strong changes in a relatively narrow window of time. The critical
vision, the sound, the
So His Holiness is interested in the more granular description of the actual intervention.
Yeah.
So just imagine the person, the participant sitting in the lab and hooked up to the computer. So you have visual imageries involved, maybe some sound involved.
Yeah.
So
these are naturally because the image or sort of sound which brings some kind of
so does it involve evoking a certain sense of joyful state, relaxed state?
Not afraid,
these
not
are,
fear.
These are not, most individuals who are trained, we've trained about 6 million individuals using these strategies. Most are not in laboratories. They're in their home or they're in their school. And they're sitting in front of a computer, commonly with headphones on, to have an environment that's quiet. And they're making decisions about what they see or hear or feel. And they're making those decisions by interacting in a computer. I will describe this in a minute.
Okay.
Of course, it matters how you train. So then you could ask the second question, and that is, how do you turn the brain that's in the prime of life into an old one? Why does it change? And the answer is, just add noise. And by noise, I mean add chatter. Add meaningless activity in the brain. Drive the brain with chaotic information. And when you do that, you very rapidly drive the brain so that over a narrow window of time, it gets older and older and older. Now, a very interesting thing to understand when you understand that the brain, these processes are reversible, is that from the prime of life, going forward in aging is equivalent to going backward. An old brain is more and more like the brain of a baby. It's more and more like the functional brain of a baby that's had no experience. Of course, it has had experiences, but because noise is entering the machine, it's moving backward again. So why are these processes reversible? Well, we know the brain is controlling change on the basis of its outcomes. When it gets the answer right, it advances. It operates at higher speed. It refines the processing that contributes to its accuracy and reliability. When it begins to make errors, it retreats. It relaxes its conditions so that most often it gets the answer right. If I'm out in the dim light and I'm trying to say, who is that I see by the wood? It takes longer for me to make the judgment. So too the brain. It takes longer for the brain to make the judgment. The brain naturally adjusts so that it more reliably gets the answer right. Anyone in their brain can substantially control whether they go forward or backward. And I'm certain your recommendation is to choose forward. Forward is good. So what's the source of all of that chatter, all of that brain noise in normal aging? Well, it's contributed richly by a modern life. It's contributed richly by sitting on your seat for long hours a day in meaningless activities. It's contributing richly by looking at screens as things flash by that have marginal importance to you or value to you. It's contributed richly in a world in which we pave even the pathway.
It's almost as if you are deliberately not giving your brain a task.
Exactly. We pave even the pathway in the countryside. You know, we no longer do we often walk with our...
It's completely relaxed.
Yeah.
But what about total relaxation? I mean, does that...
Harmful?
Is that harmful as well?
Absolute. Total relaxation is a great thing.
Yeah.
No, it's when it's meaningless engagement in noise and clutter and chatter in the common everyday life.
Relaxation is
And we're so distracted by the way we're engaged in a modern life that even when something wonderful passes right in front of us, we commonly pay no attention to it. We are we are a race of modern zombies who are sleepwalking through life.
But even if these people are, on the phone, but they're using their brain because they're talking to someone.
Yeah, they're using their brain, yes, but they're not responding to the things in life. So they're not responding to the other things in life that should draw their attention and should be stimulating because they are surprising to them. Being mindful of the surprises, of the details of the world, of the smell of the flower, or the wing of the bee, is so important to look at and see the surprises, to feel them and hear them. It's so important for the health of the brain. So a modern life often is lived as if there should not be a requirement for having much of a brain. And one of the... So you could think of the brain life as a roller coaster in which you begin and organize the brain and its activities by it changing itself to create a model of the world and to control powerful operations within it. And it grows to a peak in a young life, in the third or fourth decade in life. And then noise begins to come into the process and chatter begins to occur. And the car slowly rolls back downhill. And it does this to sustain control. It doesn't have to happen this way. The brain can be engaged in ways, on a better path, in ways in which it continues to grow, closer to the end of a natural life, grow in its power and grow in its control. And this is what we seek. We seek to create strategies by which we can help people grow in their powers, however their struggles, whatever the vicissitudes in life have fallen them, we're trying to help them have a better, stronger life. So we've engaged brains in all kinds of ways in individuals that struggle, individuals that have a history of severe developmental disorders in early life. Children that are learning impaired. Children that have a terrible childhood, a childhood marked by abuse and neglect. Individuals that suffer from addictions or from normal and pathological aging, from brain injury or stroke, which Dr. Taub will talk about in a minute, from poisoned or infected or otherwise damaged brains, from psychotic illness, depression, among many others. All of these for us are areas we engage many thousands of individuals to try to understand how we can help these individuals be more powerful, more effective in the world, to recover by using brain plasticity to drive the brain in a strengthening or corrective direction. And that's our great mission. That's how we focus our lives. We're especially interested in trying to help children that have endured terrible early childhoods. And we're conducting projects in the world because their fates are so poor, and we blame them for their terrible childhoods all of their life. We're trying to help them escape from these conditions. So with deep respect and admiration, we were following a path behind you, and we're trying to help. We're trying to do everything we can to add science, to translate our science, to improve the lot of humankind. And you are a great leader for us in this effort. Thank you very much.
Your Holiness, it is a great privilege for me to be able to describe our work to you. It's an honor. Here it is. An honor that I never really thought that I would have in my life, and this will be something that I remember for the rest of my life. I'd like to tell you about a therapy that we have developed here at UAB. It's called CI therapy, as it says on the screen. It is a family of rehabilitation treatments that harnesses the plasticity of the nervous system, and the purpose is to improve the deficits, the impairment that is produced by different types of brain injury. For example, stroke, traumatic brain injury, cerebral palsy, multiple sclerosis, and a number of other conditions. And my work is very much based on the previous work, the seminal and brilliant discoveries of Dr. Michael Merznick, who in the late 1980s and early 90s carried out a series of, if you will permit me to say so, brilliant studies that are really models of an exquisite scientific analysis of the data. If other people had problems believing that the brain was plastic, that's because they didn't really carefully read your papers. Your papers were very convincing, at least to me. And it led me to carry out the experiments that I will try to describe to you today. Actually, I'm not the best person in the world to do that. The best person in the world is Dr. Norman Doidge, who has written about them in his book, The Brain That Changes Itself. And however, I'll try to do the best that I can. I'd like to begin my talk with a very brief review of what we've been talking about today, and it's just to focus what I'm going to be talking about. What I'd like to talk about now are two axioms. First in neuroscience, which I'll talk about first, and then in the field of neurorehabilitation. As Dr. Merznick has said and Dr. Doidge has said, the brain after maturity before 1980 was believed to be hardwired and fixed. And the idea was that after an injury, for example, a stroke or a traumatic brain injury, the brain couldn't repair itself. However, very persuasive evidence has been accumulating very rapidly with ever-increasing rapidity that the brain, in fact, is very plastic. For example, in my laboratory and clinic, we have treated patients, I'll get to that in a moment. The original work, as I've said, was carried out by Dr. Merznick, and he did this in New World monkeys. And then a group that I was working with in Germany, notably Thomas Elbert and Herta Flor, demonstrated that the very same thing happens in human beings. And that, in fact, the brain is very plastic indeed. Plasticity does not end in childhood, but it continues.
So one question His Holiness has is that taking into account the plasticity discovery, can one still say that no. So for example, there are certain brain systems that are broadly mapped out. For example, those that are active in the sensory processes. You have the frontal cortex and the limbic system. So there are key brain functional regions that are mapped out. So is it still, can one still say that if this part of the brain is damaged, then the damage is irreversible? Or this percentage of the brain is damaged, it's irreversible? I mean, or does that make any sense? For example, like you're talking about the recoverable, the repairability of the brain. So, yes. In terms of brain damages, can one still say that if, say, a certain percentage of the brain is damaged, that person can never fully recover in
I'm
other
very
function?
sorry.
Now, for example, you see part of brain, which you see has a vision.
Yeah, like the visual, visual
yes.
center, visual cortex.
That cortex. Part of brain, that part of brain damaged.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you recover
yes.
visual?
Yes. What we have found in our laboratory and in other laboratories that with respect to sensory deficits in our laboratory, motor deficits and speech can be substantially improved as a result of training, but the specific kind of training that we administer in our laboratory, which involves a set of behavioral techniques. And so the part of the brain that improves depends on what you train the individual to do. If you increase the use, if you force the individual to improve on his own personal best, which may be very impaired, but if you force him to improve in very small increments by what are called successive approximations, and you do it by a technique that we call shaping and another set of techniques that we call our transfer package, so that they will continue to transfer the improvement that they have gained in the clinic into the life situation, so that they improve their quality of life and independence, then the part of the brain that you have trained will increase in volume. And that hasn't been demonstrated in all areas. The clinical results have been clearly demonstrated in terms of improvement in the function of the individual. In our laboratory, we've also been interested in the way in which that correlates with changes that are occurring in the brain at the same time. And that is in contradistinction to the second axiom that I'd like to talk about, which is in neurorehabilitation. All recovery of motor function, sensory function, language, following damage to the brain was believed to occur in the first year after the damage to the brain that produced it, and recovery after that was no longer possible no matter what kind of treatment you applied to the individual. However, we have found that this is not so. We have worked with chronic patients. One person was 50 years. It had been 50 years since he had had a stroke. We work with many people who are 20, 30, and 40 years after stroke, and we get improvements in their motor function that are just as great as we are able to get in teenagers, and in fact in very young children from 1 to 6 years old. So what we're doing in our laboratory is, I should say we also work with people who are elderly, who are in their 80s and 90s, and we get the same results with them as in younger people. And so what we're doing, and I'll show you pictures of it, slides of it later on in what I'm telling you about, is that the brain can rewire itself, it can be rewired, and it can be structurally remodeled. In short, as Dr. Merznick was saying earlier, you can teach an old dog new tricks. The plasticity of the brain will permit you to do that. Well, our laboratory, as I said, developed a treatment called constraint-induced movement therapy, which we recognized after a little while was a mouthful. And so we abbreviated it to CI therapy. And it is successful in producing large improvements in the ability to use an extremity affected by a stroke and a number of other disorders that I named before. And this is in parallel to the demonstration that Dr. Merznick made that the brain is not plastic, it is plastic, and not only that, but you can take long-standing deficits as a result of brain damage, and you can improve them substantially. In the interest of time, I'll skip to what CI therapy looks like in the clinic. And what you see here is a patient who has experienced a stroke. In this case, it was about 5 years earlier. And we put a heavily padded mitt on the hand that was not affected by the stroke. And that induces him to use the hand affected by the stroke. That's one element. And his task here is to transfer cones from one stack to the other stack, and he does it over and over and over again as rapidly as he can. The cones are about the same size as a glass of water or a can of soda, but it's a lot less sloppy in the clinic to work with cones. And you see on his side a therapist who has a stopwatch. She times everything that he does, she writes it down, calls it off to him, and encourages him to keep increasing on his personal best performance by very small approximations, very small increments. What are called successive approximations in a process that a behavioral technique called shaping. And as when he does, she praises him and rewards him verbally and encourages him to keep improving. That is, the patient isn't allowed to just stop at improving a small amount. Once he's improved, he has to keep improving. And one thing that you can't see here, and that is actually the most important part of the therapy. So there are 4 components. One is restraint of the less affected arm, The other is intensive training. Then there's training by shaping. And fourth, there is a transfer package, a set of behavioral techniques to get the patient to transfer the improvements that he's achieved in the clinic into his life situation so that it improves the quality of life and the independence of the patient.
Physical exercise.
So this is a physical activity.
This is a kind of physical therapy or, physical rehabilitation. But it's modified by behavioral techniques which hadn't been applied before in the rehabilitation field. And I will introduce you to patients who are carrying out this kind of treatment after lunch. And you'll see a number of patients who had carried it out before and who are carrying it out now. And what the transfer package does, that is the requirement that they continue performing the improved movement in the life situation, is that it makes rehabilitation into an active process. In conventional rehabilitation therapy, the patient enters a clinic, the patient approaches him, and zap, you're rehabbed. That isn't the case in CI therapy. The patient becomes the active agent. He's the critical factor in his own improvement. So there is no magic bullet. The patient does it himself. Okay, this is some data. It's not very complicated. It's data from our motor activity log, our MAL, which records the amount of spontaneous use of the more affected arm in the life situation. So it is by far, in our view, our most important measure. And you can see on the left, there are two groups. The curve on top is a group of patients who have received CI therapy, and the curve on the bottom is subjects who have received a placebo-controlled therapy. It's an active therapy. And both of them start at a very low level, about 9% of the amount of use of the affected arm compared to before training, or compared to before stroke. And that's where they begin before training. And then after just 2 weeks, 3.5 hours a day for 10 consecutive days, the CI therapy group, on average, is up to 52% of the amount of use compared to before stroke. And that is a 5 times difference. Whereas the placebo group does improve, but down at 3 months, they've returned to baseline levels. Over here. And that's in sharp contrast to the CI therapy group. This is out at 2 years after the patients received treatment. 2 years later, they have retained 80% of the treatment effect. The final point that I'd like to make is that CI therapy is not a cure. 52% isn't 100%. However, if the patients continue to perform the exercises in their activities of daily life, like feeding themselves with the affected hand, dressing themselves, putting on makeup, shaving, turning on lights with their affected arm, and water faucets. If they continue doing this and integrating what they've learned in the laboratory into their life situation, then they can and do keep improving. And if they do it assiduously, they can improve, in fact, up to normal or nearly normal movement. And I will introduce you to two such patients this afternoon, where it is, I think that they're probably both here in the audience, where you really can't tell the difference between the arm affected by the stroke and an arm not affected by a stroke. Okay, next I'd like to show you a brief video of, well, let me go back.
All right, ready, set, go.
Okay. This is before treatment. And I'd like to emphasize that this is not the most important effect of the therapy. It's just performance on standard tasks in a laboratory motor function test.
Doctor, my thumb. I gotta put that back in there.
The most important effect is the transfer to the life situation, which you can't see here. So this is before treatment.
Good.
And this will be after treatment.
Ready, set, go. Good.
Not normal movement, but the quality of movement
Ready?
is clearly improved. But again, this is not the most important result of the treatment. The treatment, the most important effect is what happens out in the life situation. This is before treatment, and he can't complete it.
Ready, set, go. Good.
Not normal, but an improvement.
Ready, set, go. Okay, you're fine. Remember, you got lots of time. You got 2 minutes. You're fine. I'm just going to make sure you don't fall. Keep going.
We give him 2 minutes, and he completed it after 67 seconds. I'm sure you didn't want to watch him struggling.
Ready, set, go. Okay.
Okay, the results have been replicated quantitatively in 4 laboratories that we set up in Germany. Their therapists were trained here at UAB. In addition, we have gotten positive results have been found in over 400, it's probably over 500 published studies. This was as of a year and a half ago. Now it's probably 500 published studies, and from many different countries. This is particularly suited to undeveloped countries because it makes use of a great deal of therapist time, which is expensive in the It's expensive in the industrialized world, in the United States, for example, but it's a lot less so in other countries that are in the third world. and many studies come from that area. In addition, CI therapy was the subject of the first multi-site randomized clinical trial for stroke, supported by NIH. This was the EXCITE trial, and as you know, multi-site randomized controlled trials are presumably the gold standard of evidence in medical fields. Well, we started with the arm. It says here upper extremity. As Dr. Deutsch pointed out, over time, one's language gets corrupted and one refers to the arm as the upper extremity, but I'm really talking about the arm. And we started with stroke in adults, moved on to cerebral palsy in young children, 2 to 6 years old, and older children throughout the whole age spectrum in childhood. We call that pediatric CI therapy. We've worked with traumatic brain injury. And interestingly, we've also worked with multiple sclerosis, which is a progressively degenerating disease of the nervous system. We are able to not only arrest the development of the disease in the part of the body that we train, but we're able to reverse it. Unfortunately, the disease progresses in the rest of the body, but in the part of the body that we train, it is reversed. Then we modified the technique for the leg, and we used it in stroke, spinal cord injury, fractured hip, multiple sclerosis, and most recently in children with cerebral palsy. Then we have another form called CI aphasia therapy for treating the deficit that occurs in language after stroke.
This is speech, yeah?
A number of other disorders. And most recently, we've been working with a patient who was paralyzed from the neck down when we began. We called it CI biofeedback therapy. And right now, we've worked with her for 1.5 years. And she's able to use that arm to control her wheelchair with a toggle switch arrangement on the arm of her chair. And we are training her now to raise her hand to her mouth. We're not quite there yet, but we're working on it. We hope that by Christmas or the middle of the winter, we'll be able to have her train herself. And I will introduce her to you later this afternoon. She will be in my clinic.
His Holiness is interested in, the interventions in dealing with memory loss.
These are mainly a little bit physical.
Motor activity now.
Oh.
So His Holiness is interested in anything about, dealing with memory loss through training, if you can recover and repair them. Have anything, a lot of this is about motor activity.
This is about motor activity. We have a therapy for speech.
Yes.
In other laboratories, they've worked with visual deficits in vision, in touch, and position sense.
So, what about memory? Are there any?
We haven't worked with memory.
That's not directly, except brain. Otherwise, no physical sort of connection.
There's less connection with actual sensory modalities. The sensory, immediate sensory experience. Memory has more to do with thinking and mind.
Yes, we haven't worked with that. We thought that maybe it would be a good idea to learn to crawl before we try to fly. Well, that's the clinical part of what I would like to tell you about. It is what CI therapy enables the person with a damaged brain, how he can improve his function. It turns out that CI therapy, in parallel with that, has produces a marked change in the brain, in the gray matter of the brain. CI therapy produces an increase in the amount of gray matter in motor areas of the brain. I see that I've exceeded my time.
2 minutes.
I'll take 2 minutes just to show you some of the brain data. This is after stroke. It's group data. It's really simple to interpret. The colored areas indicate which parts of the brain in a group of patients increase in the amount of gray matter from before treatment to after treatment. And this is in a group of patients. The interesting thing here is that the improvement, the increase in gray matter, is not only on the side of the brain that controls the arm affected by the stroke, the contralateral side of the brain that has been infarcted, that has had a lesion, but it also, there's a mirror increase in gray matter in the other side of the brain. And in the control patients, there's no change. And if I have the time, I should mention that there are a number of people in the audience who have worked on these projects, particularly Jitendra Uswate from the very beginning, Victor Mark with CI therapy, Dr. David Morris, Jean Crago on the first experiment, who you will meet, someone who you can't meet because he has passed away, but he's very warmly remembered. My mentor, Neil Miller, was the second author on the first paper on CI therapy, and Dr. Tom Novak also worked on the first paper. This is a brain in a group of patients, a brain change in a group of patients, same thing as in the previous slide, in a group of patients who have MS. The change is not only on the side of the brain that controls the arm that we train, but on the side of the brain that controls the other arm, and also there's an increase in gray matter in the parietal lobe down here at the bottom, which is basically a non-motor or not primarily a motor area of the brain. It's as if the brain is making use of whatever resources that it has available to it to aid in the performance of the movement that CI therapy is forcing them to make. And this is an example of what Dr. Deutsch has called the brain healing itself. And I'd like to go to my last slide because this is a picture taken by the Hubble telescope, and it's to give you an idea of what I think are the unlimited horizons in front of us for neurorehabilitation based on the advances that Dr. Merznick and others have made in neuroplasticity. And what we have shown in our laboratory is how the damaged brain can improve itself, heal itself, and improve its function. But there's also the issue of, can the healthy brain that has not been damaged by a stroke improve itself? This is a very active area of research, and it's partly driven by research on meditation. As you know, Dr. Richard Davidson, who is your devotee, has demonstrated that through meditation...
A devotee?
Not a devotee, but that will go on.
Oh.
He isn't?
Collaborator.
A collaborator.
He has told me that he's a devotee. And that the question is, how can the healthy brain improve itself? And if you'll permit me to say so, how can it perfect itself? And I think the brain data gives point to the self-report of countless individuals who have carried out meditation over the millennia, that this kind of change can take place in the healthy brain, and it's probably related to the kind of improvement that you can get in the damaged brain. Both of them involve neuroplasticity on into a galaxy far, far away. And a long time ago.
Well, yeah. So now we have a chance to have a dialogue, and Your Holiness, would you like to begin by asking some questions, or should I raise some questions?
As I already questioned, where is mind? And perhaps I think, according to the scientist, emotion
neuroscientists have a rough idea where the emotions, the seat of emotion is in the brain.
So roughly, they identify certain places of the brain. So as I think, as I mentioned earlier, it's quite easy to make distinction, sensorial.
Experience level.
We call mind, sensorial mind, and the mental level mind. Like dream, at the time of dreaming, sensorial, not active, but mental. Then deep sleep, further deeper mind. So as you briefly mentioned, Sajgoti, through training of mind, this is already evidence, there's some effect
on the brain.
On the brain. Of course, like memory, I asked, memory through training, memory increasing. And also we call analytical meditation, actually very helpful to sharpening your mind. So main sort of method through training of mind. But its effect on brain also then come. So a lot of, as you mentioned, that because of the galaxies, I'm quite sure, like the previous century, certain sort of concept
ideas
are quite limited. Then further develop. So our understanding become deeper. So this is very, I think, proper way for further development.
Progress now.
So as I mentioned earlier, combination, the experiences about training of mind. I'm not talking about next life or heaven or Buddhists call nirvana or salvation. We are not talking these things. It's simply because of the present of our life. First, I usually use it describing more because of I'm saying the purpose of our meeting with scientists, two purposes. Number one, simply expand our knowledge. Modern science mainly focusing matters, including brain. The ancient Indian sort of psychology also involved training of mind and a lot of sort of precise sort of the identity about emotions of mind, hundreds different emotions, and then explanation how to interrelate it. So these, I think is very helpful. You see, to further expand scientific knowledge, not only matter, but also mind or emotion. With fuller knowledge about emotion, usually I call map of mind, map of emotion. Then that is also, I think, helpful to explain deeper level about neuron, these also activities or changing because of new plasticity.
Yeah, plasticity.
So this is just purely academic knowledge. Then with that knowledge, you see, firstly, because of the utilize this knowledge for better health, as you mentioned. You see,
translations into applications in the domain of health.
And as I raised the question, through training, how to increase our memory or these things. So these are something, the implications.
Applications of the knowledge.
Application for practical, useful.
I'd like to say that we have worked hard to develop strategies that can improve your operations in memory when they fade as you're older, or when they're limited because of other problems in life or struggles in life, or when your brain is wounded. And we've conducted many studies that demonstrate that we can accomplish improvements in memory almost always in someone with this kind of history. And it's accomplished not by practicing remembering directly. It's accomplished by improving the way the brain is recording information, by the precision, its accuracy, its power with which it's recording information. It's also contributed to by improving the intensity of concentration in listening or in seeing, in attention control. So these things you would attribute to improving the quality of the mind to attend, to drink in, to take in the information. We have also been very interested in trying to help individuals recover their social cognition abilities, their understanding of the social circumstances in their life. I might say that we always see the training that we would apply to some. So we train, for example, people that have had psychotic illness, who lose social control, do not understand how to operate as a social being. And what we found is that when we improve their cognitive performance, it wasn't enough for improving their life, because improving their life required that they reattach to their mother, to their family, that they could have a friend again, that they could reattach to other people in a way that they could keep a job, that they could live a more normal life. So we can train many of the fundamental abilities that support that, but there's always something missing. And what's missing is that social control is not just taking in from the outside. It also comes from the inside. It comes from the person themselves as saying how they feel. It comes from the person themselves as the controller, as the agent in their social actions. So it takes a collaboration. We can train the brain in lots of ways that help such an individual, make the brain appear in its function to be much more normal. But it also takes what you do. It takes a collaboration. It takes coming from inside and coming from outside to get the greatest effect.
Right, that's right.
So he's was saying that there needs to be some kind of voluntariness on the part of the person.
That must come. That must be part of it. And also, when we think of someone that's been wounded, that perhaps they've been abused or they've had something terrible in their life, and it's disturbed them, we can do a lot to help them. We can do a lot to correct the distortions that have occurred in their brain. But it's very difficult to deal with the specific cause of the disturbance, of the distortion. That takes a different kind of help. That takes a more personal kind of help that relates to where they've been. And it takes a lot of that change has to occur from within. So it's a collaboration. It's a collaboration of what our kind of science in translation, what neuroplasticity can do to help. It can help a lot. But it's not complete. It doesn't, you still have to operate in the world with the real complexities of a real life.
And also, I think, from the psychological viewpoint, right?
And also from the psychological point of view, when there is a kind of voluntariness in the activity that the individual is doing, there's also an element of joy, the ability to take joy.
Right.
Because otherwise, sometimes people do things without the voluntary dimension, then they feel it more as a burden.
Right, no, absolutely.
So therefore, its effect on the brain must be, quite striking, whether or not there is a voluntary dimension to the individual's activity.
Right. One of our goals is always to try to get the person to be in charge of their own self-correction as much as we can in whatever way we can.
But it's also saying that this, taking charge, take also be used in a negative ways. People who are quite brutal and cruel, they can take charge too.
Yes, it's true. It's true. Yeah.
So what guarantee the volunteer or enthusiasm more positive, constructive way, not
Right.
destructive way. How to make that?
Our science is subject to abuse. It's subject to distortion. It can be used to damage people, understanding that you can change brains under some level of control. It happens now in the world. It's a powerful force for good, it's a powerful force for evil.
Human intelligence. These, you see, because of the either constructive or destructive. Willpower, determination, self-confidence, all either can be
constructive or destructive.
So you see, it becomes importance of motivation, more altruistic motivation. It's the main guarantee. All our ability or potential then lead more constructive way. Anger, fear, hatred, jealousy lead.
Destructive direction.
So the identify the brain specialist jealousy.
So given that there is quite a high degree of neuroscience understanding of where the emotions are located, so His Holiness is asking the two scientists and three, including you, we have, problematic emotions like jealousy, anger, and so on. Are there specific brain kind of expressions of these? Can you kind of locate them?
So if so, then gradually develop some technique to reduce activities of that part of brain.
A technique has already been developed.
Norman has worked with patients to try to help them control, by trying to change them plastic to help them control such distortions.
There's another technique, and the technique is called meditation.
But actually, meditation is a single noun for a whole family of things, of course, and some of them, and I have my psychiatric and psychoanalytic hat on, some of those things are important to be able to experience, ultimately to reflect on. Sometimes, people think psychiatrists are very touchy-feely because they always talk about having to feel your emotions. And I think I was doing it for about 25 years till I figured out why it's actually good to feel your emotions. And not indulgent in many situations. And that's because I think because we're animals and we have evolved and are prepared for certain kinds of archetypal situations that we all face as animals, as human beings, these preset patterns, which we call emotions, which have many components to them, basically tell us the meaning of the event that we are experiencing. And sometimes because we're very good at dividing our minds up and dissociating things away, we're surprised by our emotions, where they're coming from. And sometimes they're very instructive. If something is making us angry, it's telling us we are feeling injured or someone close to us is feeling injured.
Evolution. Yeah, that's it.
And this holds for all the emotions, including the ones that get a bad rap like jealousy or whatever. Of course, emotions can harden into things like hatred, where there's really no dynamism, there's no reflection on it. It becomes a kind of incitement to itself, the way anger can justify itself and make us even more angry as we think about our wound. But many of the emotions are very dynamic, and if they can flow through us, that can also be very helpful. And of course, reflection is a process that allows, and feeling them to some degree, of course, is a process that allows us to move through those. And I'm sure that there are kinds of meditation that are very comfortable with this notion of feeling and reflecting simultaneously.
hatred slap juga lah, ane kong tu thal lo me so, jadi dia ada message pentos kaya mara sih, ni cita emotion ring mang bucilia, kau cita tunje.
If I may just say, because this is called neuroplasticity and healing, we've all sort of presumed that we're talking about healing of the brain, but there was something in one of Dr. Merzenek's slides, which I have a feeling would be of interest to Your Holiness, which was in that long list of things that occur when you train the brain, one of them was that the immune system improves. And, you know, again, in Western medicine, we divide the body up, we divide the physiological functions up, we divide our medical specialties up, and different people treat different parts. Different people treat the brain, the emotions, the immune system, and so on. But of course, that's only in the textbooks that they're divided up. And now we discover that the immune system and the general nervous system are much more involved than we had ever thought. And they may in fact be part of the same kind of system that we've been coming at from different angles. I'm just wondering if in your traditions of meditation you've had much experience of using either Tibetan medicine or meditation to deal with what we in the West would call immunological disorders, the disorders of too much inflammation, arthritis, and many disorders are turning out to be related to the immune function. Even some depressed people have high levels of inflammation. The Alzheimer's brain, for reasons we don't totally understand, is a very inflamed brain, and of course there are all the diseases in which the immune system attacks the body.
The immune system stress
further research and
Solens feels that this is an area that really needs more research. I mean, there are individuals like Richard Davidson who's interested in this domain where the nervous system and immune system intersect and what the implications of the practices would be.
So I think it is quite sort of obvious experiences. The people who have sort of more compassionate mind, naturally, their mental state becoming more calm. Through that way, physical condition also better. That the condition,
So, although that seems to be, we have kind of anecdotal evidence of these cases of individuals who are more compassionate. There are calmer states of mind, which then affects their overall well-being and physical health. But we don't fully understand what the mechanisms are.
We've trained, when we train animals in ways that rejuvenate them when they're near the end of life, we would expect them to die shortly after the training is completed, but they don't die. In fact, they're vigorous. So we have a long history of understanding that if we engage the physical body, it has good effects for our brain. But we have less appreciation of the fact that if we engage our brain appropriately, with appropriate intensity and sincerity, it actually has physical effects in our body. So in a rat, through such an experience, the rat's life will be 30 or 40% longer, doing nothing else. The rat will live for more than a year longer than it's supposed to. And we think this occurs because we're not just increasing the immune response, but we're increasing the response of the brain controlling processes that occur in the body that contribute to its health, expressed through the autonomic nervous system and other ways. And I'm sure you're influencing those in your practices. I'm sure you're influencing them in a positive way in your practices.
level 교와 간에서 두고 와도 디토네 수부 최대한 교부 두고 와도 셰바시라 세셰시라 제 두고 와 말했어. 때네 뉴욕 교와 단제 자주를 교와 단 미세토네 레벨 교와 진제니 새로운 로야 되는 용거 알아봤을 때 두들이 용되고 그 지 이뮤 시스템 다 망부질 패는 두고 알아봤을 때 인사나 코로나 처바 제베나 로 장배 꼼자바다 인식 공부하는 레그토네 페이지 최대한 교용해 등 immune system that is only you gain danger. That must be true, yeah.
And in fact, there's a great deal of evidence from a long line of research with transcendental meditation that there is a very marked decrease in the use of the healthcare system in the United States and in Canada as a result of long-term practice of meditation, like 90% fewer hospital days and increase in longevity, decrease in heart attacks, even in cancer. And it clearly is affecting the immune system and a variety of other systems, and that's hard data.
그래서 어디서 그랬을는 게?
전투주의 배제 유 레사스. No.
저 치료지 어려운데.
치료요 말 치료 그런다는데.
명가래요.
싱가포르.
선이 얼마?
Would you like to take a couple from the
His Holiness was wondering whether he could take one or two questions from the audience.
Sure, we can take a couple of questions. If, ladies and gentlemen, you just stand up. It's hard for me to see out. Well, we'll probably have to privilege since I don't think we have a circulating mic. So shout it out.
What would the Holiness suggest in terms of trying to limit and reduce cynicism in modern life?
cynicism is like that. 개개 초염을 개처럼 대례 초염을 가지고 있는 연조 양년 따대죠, 봐. 연조 양년 따대.
That I think depend the individual sort of viewpoint or outlook. There are positive things, negative things. So if our mind focusing only one aspect, the negative side, then this is the frustration or hopelessness increase, and cynicism.
Yeah, cynicism as well.
If you look the more wider perspective, then today's world not completely negative. If really negative, then I think a human population, there is no reason to human population increasing. So it's children taking care, and all sick people taking care, and longevity increase because of sort of medicine or some other sort of care longer. So there's, I think now here, the Alambama, I mean this city, what is population?
What's the population of Birmingham? Do you know? What is the population of Birmingham?
Well, the city is about 250,000 people. The metropolitan area is 1 million people.
Oh, so 1 million. I think, look, 1 million human population. I think killing, murder, I think just few handful. The rest of the people, you see, survived with human love, human affection. So there is a sufficient reason to look more positive things. I lost my own country at the age, I think 16. I lost freedom. age 24, I lost our own country. And a lot of problem. But not only problem, but it's not only negative, but look, wider perspective, there are many things which give us hope
optimism,
and optimism. So that I think you should, you already have, you see, as a normal human being, 2 eyes. Now you should try to keep third eye to look wider. Or eye here. So not only look front, but also should look behind. That's my view. So there's plenty of reasons, you see, feel happy, hopeful. These scientific research also, you see, give us hope. I think 20th century, if you look back to the 20th century, early part of 20th century, later part of 20th century, I think because of human maturity, I think thinking become much more wider. Now, for example, the desire of peace. I think in the early part of 20th century, when nation declare war, all the citizens of the country, without slightest question, proudly join war effort. Now, later part of 20th century, no longer that kind of thing. And this country, Vietnam War, a lot of demonstrations against the Vietnam War, isn't it? And then Berlin Wall disappeared. Many former Eastern European countries under totalitarian system changed, not by force, but by popular movement. And then now, I think, as you mentioned previously, science and spirituality much related with mind. Now there's something too different. Now that come closer. And then environmental issue. In the early part of the 20th century, no concept, no idea. Simply consume. Now, many people knows that we also have the responsibility to look after our planet itself. So these are very, very positive development. I always look at these sort of sites. So then, you see, my mind always remain positive, optimistic. Are you here? Question? No. You discuss.
No.
Good morning. Thank you, Drs. Merznick and Tal, and Holiness. I never thought I'd be saying this. And Professor Jinpa and Dr. Deutsch. Thank you. I've got 3 copies.
Question number 1.
In doing so, the question...
Louder.
The questions that we ask are what drive us forward. The questions that you have answered have only brought more questions. This past week I had an unusual experience in actually looking for a hard copy of this book. There was a very unusual confluence of events, but it causes me to ask this question. Do we have the ability, either with Dr. Schwartz's OCD therapy or with Dr.
I'm not very sure. Your own question.
It's in your book, understand. There's Dr. Leon, Pasquale Leon's therapy that can produce stimuli into the brain which we've never been able to do before, other than through either visual stimuli or auditory stimuli. This week had a very unusual event that I believe caused, or coincidentally, or via karma, caused an epileptic hallucination with someone that I encountered. And I'm wondering if there's either with a functional MRI or whether it's something that we can induce via Dr. Pasqualeone's TMC, the transcranial magnetic stimulation, in order to study it and find out what is happening in the brain when there is a hallucination, or what is, if we can determine what that is there a way that the plasticity of the brain can be used to rewire around it, or to somehow deal with it in other ways? But I'm not seeing much. There are a couple of
I think I can translate that question to Mike. So, no, I understand where you're coming from, sir. And, one of the questions is, I think in behind this is, what's happening in the brain when it goes off without voluntary control, as in epilepsy or hallucinations, where we have sensory experiences of things that aren't there. And we know that the brain circuitry can start firing autonomously or for reasons we don't understand, and that thought itself is a way of stimulating the brain. The normal thoughts you're all having at any given time allow certain areas of the brain to stimulate. I don't know about the issue of the confluence of events you were talking about, but I think some of this, in a way, goes back to His Holiness's question as to where is the mind. And neuroscientists often talk as though they know where the mind is. And, we'll often see documentaries where a neurosurgeon is holding a brain and say, all your thoughts are in here, inside your neurons. But it's actually one of the big open questions. And luckily there are some open questions as to where these things go on. The ancient Greeks had a big quarrel as to whether the soul and mind were in the heart of the brain. We don't really know if the thoughts are in individual neurons, or if they're in groups of neurons, or if they're in the connections between the neurons, or if somehow or other they are the product of neurons creating waves in the brain. These are all serious open questions. And each mental experience we have is a different mental experience, and it activates different parts of these networks of the brain. So it's quite possible that where my mind is when I'm thinking of red is a different series of locations in that network when I'm thinking of Gustav Mahler or something like that, and that the so-called location of the mind is itinerant and it's moving around. And of course, each of you have minds, and they're all in different places. And then there's an even larger question of whether the mind, this is to my mind, is wholly confined to the brain, or if it's distributed not just through parts of the brain, but also parts of the nervous system in general. So these are big open questions. But Dr. Merznick's actually done some work with schizophrenic patients and had some wonderful results, and I've met those patients. Maybe you wanted to say a few words before we close.
I'll just say a little bit about it. But the changes that occur in the brain of a schizophrenic patient, first of all, there's a significant variation in how it's expressed in individual by individual, but the changes are on a very broad scale. So in a sense, there's a lot to change correctively if you have any hope of changing the brain enough to come back to normalcy. But everything we change, everything we try to do drives the brain in an improving direction. We actually have an FDA trial underway now in which we train schizophrenic patients for a total of about 96 hours interacting with a computer. And we know that by such training already that we can drive very substantial improvements in their operational abilities, much superior to the improvements that can occur with any known medicine. So one of the things we see when we train is we now understand how to train the person's understanding of where a voice is coming from. Is it coming from me? Did I just do that? Did someone else do that? Did some unknown force like God or a demon do that? Right? And we can actually see that distortion in the brain. We can basically visualize it in the operations of the brain by imaging and by recording. And then we can train the brain, and we can see that we can re-strengthen that process so that now with much higher reliability, the person understands agency. They know it is them who's acted, or that someone else has acted. And they're much less likely to assign agency to some unknown force or power. So our understanding is still incomplete, but what I absolutely believe is that if we ever cure a complex disease like schizophrenia, it will not through some crude strategy, like applying a pharmaceutical chemical to distort the brain. It will be by actually engaging the brain in the complex ways that are required for it to change itself, because the brain is plastic. And if we could do that completely enough, and if we could do that specifically enough as it relates to the specific distortions in each individual, that's the hope for a cure. If there is a cure, that will be where it comes from. Well, I'll say one last thing. It's not going to be really about treating schizophrenia. In the future, it's going to be about finding the weakness in a brain that can lead the brain to go into the distorted mode where it begins to think that it's being talked to or interacting with somebody that's not there. It's going to be about prevention. It's going to be about strengthening the brain enough before the tragedy ever occurs, so that there's a much lower probability that the individual has to live with their madness. This is where the science will carry us in the future. And it's one of the reasons why it has so much hope in its application, and one of the reasons why we're so anxious, people like Professor Taub and me, to deliver it into the world, to help people in need.
I'll just say a couple of sentences to conclude. It wouldn't be fair, would it, if you had listened to Dr. Merzenich and heard him talk about how people optimize their brains if you had no idea how to do that yourselves. You can go to the Brain Headquarters website where you can try some of those exercises yourselves. I just wanted to say that there is a theme that's emerged from the discussion, and that is, we are witnessing a new kind of medical practice emerging with neuroplasticity, and what it has in common, what all these techniques have in common, is that the patient himself or herself is now taking charge of his or her care. There are great strengths to this. This is, of course, something that has been very important in Eastern medicine. There are some limitations. Not everybody is always conscientious enough to do these things. This is hard work much of the time. Not always, but much of the time. So it requires recalibrating how you think about healthcare, and whether you are a patient, a sufferer who then presents to people who are going to fundamentally take care of you, or if you begin to see that what you do, the decisions you make, the way you apply your brain every day in your routines is really, really important ultimately to your health outcomes. So that's both an opportunity and a great challenge. Dr. Watts?
Please join me in thanking the Dalai Lama and our distinguished panelists. This concludes the symposium. We'll be adjourned. Thank you.